Hello, everybody. My name is Seper. I'm from DDD Iran. Tonight, we are really glad to meet Stefan Hofer, which is an author and an active speaker in DDD community. We have also Mariam, which will help us tonight as a domain expert. So thanks to these two people who will animate our webinar tonight. So I will let you, Stefan, start your presentation, and thank you again.
Thank you, and Salam DDD Iran, Man Stefan Hastam, and that's all the Farsi I'm going to talk tonight, because it's not good enough to give this talk in Farsi, so I will stick to English. I'm talking with you from Hamburg in Germany, even though originally I'm from Austria, but I've been living and working at a company called Workplace Solutions here in Hamburg for the last 15 years. We develop software, we coach and consult, and I myself have a background as software developer. But in the last couple of years, my focus really has switched towards requirements and towards domain-driven design, and domain storytelling is kind of in the middle of those two topics. So, a situation that I guess most of you know is that when we want to build software, especially business software, we, the software experts, we speak our technical jargon, and the domain experts, well, they speak their business language. Even if we speak the same natural language, like Farsi or English or Spanish, still we often don't understand each other. And that's of course a problem. And one big thing in DDD, and actually in all of software development, is we have to reach a state, we have to bridge this gap where we as the software experts are able to talk with the domain experts about their problem, about their needs in their own language, so we can really understand them. So, but how do we reach that? Well, in the DDD community, we have come up with this term of collaborative modeling, meaning we get people from all departments in all roles, get them together, well, ideally in a room in front of a whiteboard, but also now in the digital world, remote on digital whiteboards like Miro, for example. And we have them talk to each other. And there are several techniques that enable such conversations about the domain, about requirements, about business needs, about problems. One of those techniques is, of course, event storming, and another one is domain storytelling. And that's the technique I'm going to talk about tonight. I did not invent domain storytelling, but I gave it its name, and together with my colleague Henning, who can see here on the screen in this picture, we're also writing a book about it and giving talks about it. So why domain storytelling? What can it be used for? Well, most basically, we can use it to reach a common understanding, like I said before, between business and IT. And that's the use case that we're going to look at tonight in our short demo. But of course, there's more. So we can use it to find bounded contexts or service boundaries, for example, for microservices. We can use it to think about a domain model, designing a domain model. We can use it for working with requirements, for designing workflows, new processes. And I will briefly go into these topics towards the end of my talk, where I present some real-world examples. So that's the schedule for today. I think it's really best to understand what domain storytelling is if you actually see it. So that's why I'm very happy that Mariam and I can do this demo. And after you saw it, I will explain the method to you. So then you understand how it works. Then I will show you a couple of real-world examples. And finally, I'm happy to answer all your questions. Okay, Mariam, are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay, then I will switch my screen to different window, which you should be able to see now. Mariam, you see it?
Yeah, I have it.
Yes,
Actually,
great.
I'm ready to get down to it and figure out what the domain storytelling is really about in practice. Yeah, I'm all with you.
Okay. So, of course, for obvious reasons, we cannot be in a room together. We cannot stand in front of a whiteboard together. So this is our whiteboard for today, a little modeling tool. More on the tool later. This really isn't about a tool. You can use it with Miro or with a real whiteboard, whatever. So don't focus too much on the tool. It's just a means to an end. Okay. I already know that Mariam has a story to tell about a travel agency, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what are we going to model? What process are we going to look at?
Okay. If you agree, we can start by looking at how a travel agency works in a reservation scenario. Because I think it seems everyone is a little bit familiar with it and we can have a shared understanding of that. So as you know, the travel agency is ultimately responsible for helping travelers to select best services. And typically its customers can be divided into two major groups: business and leisure travelers.
Okay.
Yeah, and ideally the business travelers does not care about pricing that much because their company pays for that and follows registration workflows. On the other hand, the leisure travelers are often price sensitive and are interested in hotel packages, discounts, and offers. So as long as they have different wants and needs, I think it would be better to review their travel booking scenarios separately. Therefore, now my primary focus is around leisure traveler and travel agent as our main personas. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So
And
that's very good. So we start with one specific example, a leisure traveler, not a business traveler. And then you said you have your travel agent, right?
yeah, exactly. I have
Okay.
two personal, leisure traveler and travel agent. And just one important point that my discussion will go through happy path of reservation scenario, and I'll intentionally exclude any kind of alternatives or exceptions or branches to keep things clear and precise as much as possible. But you can ask me if you need any further information.
Okay, that's also great. So that's what we typically start with. We look at one specific case. Often it's the happy path. And from that, we work through the more complicated paths. Okay, so let's start. So what does a leisure traveler have to do when he wants to make a reservation at the travel agency?
Yeah, to begin, I, as a travel agent, work on the counter of a travel agency, and usually the travelers come to me and talk about their itinerary. I mean, they talk about their schedule, budget, and number of packs.
Okay, so you said at the counter. So we are not in an online world, right? We are in a physical world.
Yeah, we are in the physical
Then I will
world.
add this to our scenario, leisure traveler. Okay. So they talk to each other, and you said, what do they talk about?
Yeah, they mainly talk about the traveler schedule, budget, and the number of packs.
Okay, what is a pax?
Yeah, in travel industry, it's a slang for passengers.
Okay, I will write a quick comment here. That's my comment. So pax is person. And since you said they talk with each other, I used an icon here that represents a conversation. So they physically talk with each other, probably through a mask, of course, but still they have this conversation. Okay, they talk about the schedule, the budget number, the budget and the number of packs of passengers. And then what does the travel agent do with that information?
Yeah, then the travel agent checks the system for available services and prices.
Okay, available services and prices. what system does he or she check? Does the system have a name?
It's not a specific system. Usually we can use different systems, but it's an online ticketing system that I log into it and check services availability. Yeah, it's exactly online ticketing system.
Okay. Now I used a document here, assuming this is some sort of text-based description that you find in this online system.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and at this point, the system integrates different information from different suppliers, such as airlines, hotels, car rental companies, and summarize them as a categorized report.
Okay. So you said it gets information.
Yeah, gets information from suppliers.
Okay. Actually, I will probably change the icon to something less looking like a document. I usually take this info icon when it's like data or information in general. So it gets it from other suppliers. Since this is the first time we talk about this travel agency, I would prefer not to go too much into the technical details, what kind of systems it talks to and what protocols to talk. So for the moment, I would say it's fine for me to say suppliers, maybe even several. So it's not just one system, it could be several.
Yeah,
and it gets information from them, right?
Yeah, and when the system gathers all the information, it integrates them as a simple categorized report.
Categorized report. I will choose a document icon for that again. And you said integrates. That information to a categorized report. Okay, now the travel agent has a report about the available services and prices.
Yeah, exactly. And I simply compare the prices, since I've mentioned that we are talking about a leisure traveler and this persona is price sensitive. I compare the prices and select the best suited services to traveler upon their budget.
Okay, I add this information that our leisure traveler is price sensitive.
Yeah, and then I recommend best suited services to traveler.
Okay, so.
Yeah, exactly. It's again kind of negotiation.
And such a service, so that's like a package of different things, like a hotel, maybe a flight, something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Usually the main suppliers are airlines, car rentals, hotels, and other things like that.
Yeah, that's also worth a note. So we have airlines, hotels, car rentals, and so on. Okay. Okay, then you recommend, or the travel agent recommends something to the leisure traveler, yeah?
Yeah, and at this point, the traveler makes his or her mind and select the preferred ones.
Okay, and they do that like immediately, or do they take the offer with them home, or should I?
Yeah, as you mentioned, in reality, this case happens sometimes, but for now, we can suppose that our traveler make a decision at that time. Yeah, choose services.
So you choose a particular service, and again, that's a conversation that's happening. Okay.
Yeah, again. Yeah, and after that, I register personal information of traveler and his or her packs in the system again.
Okay, so that looks like something that I can show with a document icon. So personal information of passenger and packs, and that goes into the online ticketing system, right?
Yeah, exactly. Is it necessary to mention that this personal information includes their identity and context information?
We can add that with a note. So we have contact info and some, what is it, identity?
Yeah, their identity.
Identity. Forgive me, it's late. I'm not sure if I'm making many spelling mistakes. It doesn't look right. Okay, if it's wrong, I cannot spot it. Sorry.
No matter, no matter. Yeah, when I enter this information to the system and select the services, the system puts selected services on hold and generates invoice.
Okay, so there are at least two things going on here. So basically, this personal information is also used to you said put on hold, right?
Yeah, I put on hold the services, the selected services.
Okay, selected services. So no one else can buy this service, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I understand that. Yeah, so we put it on hold. Okay, and then you said something about an invoice.
Yeah, the system generates invoice and notifies me.
Okay. And for that invoice, you also need the information we had at step 7, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's right.
And you are notified about this invoice, so it's not sent to the customer directly or something.
No, it first notifies me because sometimes there's a time lag between the sending request, reservation request to suppliers and receiving responses, but it doesn't take too much time usually.
Okay, so in general, how much time does it take for this invoice?
At least up to 5 minutes.
But you said in a bad case, it could be much longer.
Yeah.
Then maybe I can do something to separate this notification from the invoice a bit more clear. Maybe I should do it like that. So I have this information icon here. Let's call it invoice notification. Does that look right?
Yeah, it's right.
Okay. So now I know that the invoice is ready.
Yeah, exactly. The invoice is ready. And I asked travelers to pay the whole amount of invoice using our payment terminal.
Okay, there's a payment terminal. I will just use another computer icon for that because I didn't change the palette of available icons. So that's your payment terminal. Okay. And now the leisure traveler has to pay that price, right?
Yeah, pay the price.
So that's a credit card icon. So I'm assuming since it's a terminal, it's not a cash payment, it's usually a card payment, right?
Yeah, right.
Wouldn't it?
After that, the payment terminal sends an acknowledgement to the system.
Okay, to the online ticketing system?
No, to our system.
Yeah,
Here. Yeah, exactly, in our online ticketing system.
I'll make a little room here. So again, I will use this info icon for this notification. You said it sends an acknowledgement, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Then there's an acknowledgement, and now the online ticketing system knows that it's paid for. Why does it need to know that?
Because actually, when the payment due, actually the system generates PNR. And when the PNR registered, we can say that the reservation process is finished.
Okay, what's a PNR?
Yeah, PNR is the abbreviation form of passenger name record. And it's a digital certificate allowing passengers to do online check-in.
Okay, so this is generated, right?
Yeah, it's generated.
Okay, and then we have this PNR. And
yeah, when we have PNR, the system sends the PNR to the passenger email.
okay, so I can either do it as 2 steps, or maybe to make it a bit shorter, I can just add on here an email and say this is now the PNR in form of an email. And that one goes to the traveler. Zoom out a little bit. Now it's typical for this kind of workshop that it looks a bit messy at first. Usually it takes a couple of minutes after the workshop to clean it up a little bit. So let's add and sends. So the online ticketing system generates the PNR and sends it as an email to the traveler, right?
Yeah, well done. Now I can say that we can say that the reservation process is finished.
Okay, then we can do something very quickly to round it up. Can you still read the text, or is it too small now?
To me, it's clear, but I'm not sure about other audience, or
Okay.
maybe.
I will read it out anyway. So what I can do now is, some of the beauties of this little tool, I can actually replay the story step by step or sentence by sentence to check if there's anything missing or inconsistent. So what I've understood is that the reservation at the travel agency, given that we have a Malaysia traveler who is price sensitive and who comes in person to the travel agency, to the desk, first he talks about the schedule and his budget and the number of packs, the passengers with the travel agent, who then checks for available services and prices in an online ticketing system. That ticketing system gets a lot of information from several suppliers like airlines, hotels, car rentals, and so on, and creates a categorized report, which then the travel agent uses to recommend the best suited services to the leisure traveler. So that's something that really the person does, right? So it's not like, here's the best offer and the machine tells you what to do. This is like, with the experience of the travel agent, they do that, right?
Yeah, right.
Okay. Then the leisure traveler chooses a particular service, and the travel agent then puts the personal information of the passenger and the packs, including the contact info and the identity, into the online ticketing system. And now I know why that makes sense, because we said, well, the selected services are put on hold, and the information then is used to generate an invoice. And here it's noteworthy that you, as travel agent, you get an invoice notification, because it can take up a couple of minutes, and maybe you don't see that the invoice is ready, because then the traveler still needs to pay the price of the services that he or she chose with a payment terminal. That's also in the office, I guess. And then the payment terminal sends an acknowledgement to the online ticketing system. And now we can finally generate the passenger name record, which can be used for online check-in. And since we already have the contact info from step 7, we can now send an email to the traveler. And then basically it's done. We have made a reservation, chosen something, paid for it, and now I can take my flight to, let's say, Shiraz and enjoy the city of gardens and roses. So Did we miss something?
No, actually, I think we visualized everything, and I really enjoyed from this pictographic, and I think whatever I've explained now I have in my screen. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You were a wonderful domain expert. And
thank you so much.
Even though this was just a short example, I already learned a lot about this domain. So I learned that there are several systems involved. There's a ticketing system. There are other external systems that the system communicates with. We have domain terms like PNR and service and report. And there's still some manual judgment going on. So there's invoicing. So there's a lot of stuff involved that I already can start to understand. And I guess the next step would be, for example, to look at the scenario where we don't have a leisure traveler, where we have a business traveler. And I guess the process would look differently then. And maybe you can also look at some error scenarios later, like, for example, what if there's no suitable services that we can provide, or what if the leisure traveler changes his or her mind and the number of passengers changes. So that's something we would typically take a look at a bit later. Okay, so now that you've seen how it works, it's time to explain you the method. And for that, I will switch back to my slides. Actually, no, you know what? I will stay with this here and just explain the method using this picture. So the first thing I'm going to explain is this pictographic language that we've been using. So in domain storytelling, we distinguish several kinds of icons. We have actors, for example, a leisure traveler, the travel agent, but also IT systems like the online ticketing system. They are the active parts of the story. They do something, they are active, hence the actors. And then we have the passive parts. We call them work objects. For example, we have a report here or an invoice. So those are the things, the information that we work with and that are created. And we use icons to make the picture a little bit more tangible. So whenever possible, we use an icon that actually adds meaning to the story. So the icons are not just there to make it look more beautiful, they should actually convey some meaning. So typically we try to express the medium, like here it's a conversation in step 1 and 5 and 6, or it's like either a document or a form in step 7, or it's an email here in the second part of step 12. And you will also notice that the story evolves around the actors. That's why the actors are there only once, like the travel agent and the leisure traveler. But the work objects, they can appear several times. For example, the PNR here. We have it here as just a piece of information, and we have it here in the form of an email. So that's very useful if you, for example, want to show how a piece of information changes its representation during the course of a process. So imagine at home, the leisure traveler prints out the email and then has a printout of the PNR and uses it to check in at the airport. Then it would have changed from a piece of information in a computer to an email to a piece of paper. And that's something you can easily express with that method. Then, of course, we have the arrows. Those are our activities. So the things that, the actions that the actors do, like pay something or check something or recommend something. And I hope you noticed that during the whole conversation, I really tried to listen to Mariam and get the terms that she uses in the domain, trying not to invent my own terms, not my technical terms. So it's not like create, read, update. If you have to do with databases every day, it's easy to say, okay, here's just something created, updated, deleted. Really try to listen to the domain experts here. And the final ingredient in our language is annotations. So I can have annotations either here directly at a step, or can have them at the top of the story if they concern the whole story. So that's our pictographic language. And with that language, we can build sentences. Sentences like the travel agent checks available prices and services in the online ticketing system. So the idea is that a sentence in the pictographic language reads pretty much like a natural language sentence in your language. Now that's individual languages, sentences, but to tell a story, we need several sentences. So what we do is we append them, and that's when the little numbers here come into play. So we just number the activities, so we can a sequence, and this is very different from other business process modeling approaches where you model, for example, from left to right along a timeline or from top to bottom. Here you cannot really see the sequence by reading it from left to right. So that's why it's really useful either to have a feature like this to step through, or if you show something, this diagram, talk them through. Yeah, this diagram is useful as an aid to memory when you were at the workshop, but if you just give it to someone who wasn't at this workshop with us, it's hard for them to read. So really make it a storytelling. So retell the story to them. Okay, so now we can tell our stories, and I think now it's time to switch back to our slides, because there's something that I cannot show you in this little example here, because it's not part of the language. And maybe you've noticed it. So give me a quick okay if you are seeing the slides again.
Yes, it's okay.
Okay. So the thing that is missing in domain storytelling are gateways, cases, ifs, switches, however you want to call them. So those little decision points that are usually present in activity diagrams in BPNN or other workflow languages. That's deliberate decision to leave them out of the notation, because we don't want to deal with abstract processes in this methodology. Rather, we want to deal with concrete examples. So instead of showing all the possible paths that could happen, we first want to look at a couple of good examples of what is actually happening. Because in my experience, when you talk with domain experts, they usually start to think in edge cases. So they tell you, well, a number of things could go wrong. Maybe the external systems are offline. Maybe while we were talking, someone else booked that service that you wanted to book, and then it's not available anymore. Or maybe just the flight was booked, or just the return flight was booked by someone else, and then you have to change one little thing in from the whole package that you want to order. And so from one case, you go to the next case, and then you spend an hour, 2 hours discussing what could possibly happen without having understood a concrete case of what actually happens. So of course, in software development, sooner or later, you need to arrive at these points where you write software that can actually deal with all those conditions. And that's perfectly okay. But what we want to do here is we want to learn from a couple of good examples before we jump to premature and therefore bad abstractions. First, make it concrete, tangible, verifiable. The diagram that we just drew together, the domain story, that's easy to verify by a domain expert. If something is wrong, they can point with their finger at it and say, no, there's something missing between step 5 and 6, or this arrow here at step 7, that should be the other way around. That's much easier in such a domain storytelling workshop than if you just present them, let's say, a UML diagram. So first, have a couple of good examples, and then build your abstractions upon it. What are such examples? Typically, we start with the happy path. Then we look at important variations. So the business traveler versus the leisure traveler, that's a good second case. Another case that we want to look at is probably a error case that happens all the time, or maybe there's an error case that doesn't happen that often, but if it happens, it's really bad because you lose all your booking data or whatever. So these are the cases that we want to look at. And usually a handful, 3, 4, 5 variations of a complex business process are enough to get a sound understanding and then move on in building your system. Now, if we had used a whiteboard, I would have chosen a layout like here, where on the main surface area I draw, and then I leave a little space to the side for preconditions, assumptions, and triggers. So that's where on the top of the story in this little tool that I used. So I said, okay, this is the happy path. This is a leisure traveler. They are at the desk in the office. So that concerns the whole story. And then on the individual steps, we make these little annotations, either directly at the steps or in a area on the side, where we write down a couple of variations. Maybe some steps are optional, or some steps are only necessary if you're traveling with children, something like that. And I collect those ideas when someone presents them to me, and then say, okay, that's interesting. So family, I will write it down. What if they are traveling with children? And then we go back to our scenario and finish our story. And once the story is finished, I revisit the list of annotations and say, here we said, what if some passengers, some packs are actually children? How does it change the process? And then people usually say something like, well, then we need an additional step here, or we can leave out another step. So the difference is very little. And sometimes you have a case where they say, oh, the process would look completely different. And what we do then is we just draw another domain story. So that's how we deal with variations. That's how we find good examples and then continue with our project. Another thing that I should mention is the topic of scope. So what do I mean by scope? The one factor that is easy to understand is the level of detail that we choose for domain story. Also call it granularity frequently. So this example here is from, well, it's a fictitious example from a cinema where you can make reservations and buy tickets for movies. So the left one, this is a very high level view, a big picture. So you have a moviegoer, and in the first step, he or she buys a ticket from the cashier. It's very coarse-grained. And then the second step is you buy snacks, you show your ticket in the entrance, the ticket is checked, and then you watch the movie, which is started by a projectionist. That's basically, in 5 or 6 steps, the whole movie experience from a moviegoer's view. But of course, we can dig deeper. So the third step, the moviegoer buys tickets from the cashier, we can actually tell a whole domain story, possibly even several, about buying a ticket. So that's what you see on the right side. So now we have a process here with much more detail where you choose a seat and there's a seating plan and there's money that you need to pay and then finally you get your ticket. So you see the different levels of granularity. The first one is on a very high level. That's perfect, for example, if you have no idea about a domain, you don't even know what they're doing. Currently, I'm working for a company, for example, they produce machines for steel manufacturing. I have no idea how that works. That's how they got me on board and helped me to get into the domain. And now we're at a much more fine-grained level and we can talk about the details. So this is what I mean with scope. But level of detail is just one of the scopes. Another factor would be, are we looking at the process as it currently is, the as-is process, or are we looking at a process how we want it to be? Are we designing a new process? So we can do both with domain storytelling. And another factor would be, do you want to actually show the existing systems, how they are used? Or do you want to leave them out? If you look into in detail at the right one, you don't see any systems here. So that's an idealized version. That's usually what we do if we find that the business experts actually have lost their own domain language because they were forced to use very bad software systems and are not able anymore to talk in a clear business language. Then we say, okay, imagine you would go back to pen and paper. How would you do the process then? And then they find their language again. So that's a little trick. The story that we just did together in the demo, I would say from level of detail, it's somewhere between those two. It's definitely not as high level as the left one, maybe not as detailed as the other one. It includes at least some of the existing IT systems, and it's an as-is process, so as it currently is. So the example that I did with Mariam, that would be perfect still for getting to know the domain, but also for talking about problems. So if I want to do problem analysis, what goes wrong, where are your pain points, where can we improve, I would probably choose a scope like we did in this short demo. Now, the picture is just one half of domain storytelling. The other half is it's a workshop format. That's probably even the more important thing, even though they're closely connected. So it's a workshop format, and you can use it in a situation like Mariam and I did in a one-on-one interview. It works, but typically we have a whole group of domain experts with us, and we want that group to be diverse and really working at the frontier. So they really have to know how it is out there. We don't put any proxies or people who know from hearsay how things work. You really want the experts there. So we often have people from different departments, from IT and from the business side, talking together, analyzing why the processes are bad, analyzing requirements for new systems, and having these conversations. They're very important. And actually the conversation, that's almost half of the gain that you will have. The picture is just there to help you along and to have something as a document later on, but having the conversation is really important. And you will see that if you miss important people in this conversation, the results will not be as good. So we want this whole group of people there, and what we want to avoid is something that I think was done a lot in the past, probably is still done a lot today, where we have a requirements engineer here with pen and paper and a domain expert here, the lady with the green hat, have like this one-on-one interview, and the requirements engineer asks questions from a catalog, and she writes everything down in the protocol. And the domain expert here, she will do her best to answer the questions to the best of her knowledge and be nice and cooperative, because that's what she's supposed to do. And then 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks later, she gets a big Word document, and here, please read it and sign it off. And that's how it traditionally worked. And for me, that's an anti-pattern, because the poor domain expert has no means to influence the mental model of the business or business analyst or requirements engineer. So she gives information, and then magically the information turns into some sort of requirement specification, and then you get this big piece of paper and need to read it, and it's pretty late for giving feedback. So instead, we want this whole conversation about requirements and business processes and needs to be a vivid conversation on eye level. So again, you saw how I tried to use the phrases and the words, the terms that Mariam used. I really want to learn this language so we can talk on eye level about this. And that's really important. And if you're into DDD, well, of course, this language then later also goes on to be your ubiquitous language, forming bounded contexts and actually ending up in the code. For that process to work, it is really, really important that you visualize the story, not just orally by telling it. You have to visualize it, and everyone has to see the picture, either in a room on a whiteboard, or like we do with Zoom or some online tool, and everyone has to see the picture. because only that gives the domain expert the chance to give immediate feedback. Like, no, this is wrong. 6 and 7 need to be changed. The order is wrong. Or we had an interesting example once where everyone was talking about ship, 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 and they used the same icon everywhere. It's in a shipping domain, but cargo ship domain. And since they used the same icon everywhere, people started to notice that this doesn't make sense. And then for them, it was clear, but for other people, it's not clear that they used the term ship in different meanings. So we started to distinguish it with different icons, and then became clear where there was a big misunderstanding. So that was really helpful there. So these are the kinds of things that are possible when you visualize the story while it is happening. And you can do that like on a whiteboard with sticky notes. We actually manufactured a whiteboard kit, but I guess in this day and age, we will stick to digital tools, either with smart boards, or you can basically use Draw.io or Visio or Glyphy or whatever. But it's, to be honest, a bit cumbersome. Even if you make your own templates and stencils, it's still a bit cumbersome to use. So the tool that I used, we had to build it ourselves based on some BPNN software, and it's open source, and you can use and download it on GitHub. I will send you the slides later, so all the links will be in the slides, so you don't have to write anything down now. So just try that out if you like. For the techies here, the files are saved in the JSON format, so there's really not much of a login here. It's just a human readable JSON, and you can also export it as PNG or SVG. Okay, so much for the pictographic language, the scope, and the workshop format. And now I've prepared a couple of real-world examples. How are we doing time-wise? Yes, I prepared 3 different examples. So maybe I can present all 3 of them, and then there should still be enough time for Q&A. So as I said before, there are different use cases for domain storytelling, designing new processes, analyzing problems, working with requirements. So some of those use cases motivated us to use domain storytelling in these projects. So the first one is a software that we built to coordinate roadwork. And what happened was, a couple of years ago, the city of Hamburg contacted us. We knew each other from previous projects, and they said, well, we have this problem here. There are a lot of traffic jams, and construction sites are a real problem. They're causing traffic jams. And we think that we could improve the situation if we had better coordination of the construction sites of this roadwork. So that was the whole idea. Start early to coordinate the construction efforts, so then in the years later to come, you have less impact on the traffic. So we said, but they said, well, can you build some software for that? And we said, well, we are sure we can build some software for that. The only problem is we have no idea about roadwork and coordination and construction. So what is going on here? So what we did is we had a series of workshops with domain experts. And before we started even domain storytelling, we did some old-fashioned UML use case diagrams. Why? Because they said, well, we think the problem is in coordination. So we asked them for all of the use cases. Those are the bubbles, in case you're not familiar with the use case diagram notation. And then we added all the stakeholders or actors that are active in one of those use cases. And then we just looked at, okay, which use cases involve a lot of people. So here on the right side, you see a little zoom into this use case diagram. And in the end, we picked, I think it was 5 different use cases where there were a lot of people involved and analyzed them for coordination. And one of them was this coordination round, it's called, or coordination meeting. And that we picked, invited the people involved. And in the very same workshop day, we started to draw some domain stories. So that's one of them. We did it with a different tool, doesn't matter. It's also in German. It doesn't matter. You don't have to understand the process. So this is about a meeting, hence the group of people here. And they have one very important work object that's called a coordination list from Excel, and print it out and send this email, first Excel, then email, then print it out and do a lot of things with it. And when they told us this process, and we said, well, it must be very cumbersome working with this long list of construction sites, and it would be really cool to see such a meeting and participate. When is the next meeting, and maybe can we observe it? And they said, okay, the next time there's such a meeting, you are invited. And then we attended the meeting. And since we had this domain story before, we knew why they were having this meeting, how the meeting was prepared, what was expected, and also the work objects they used. For example, here on the right, you see this actual printed out coordination list, and you see a person with a ruler going through the list with the ruler because there are so many lines on it. If you don't have a ruler, this 8, you will lose the line, and then you cannot talk about it. And on the screen here in front, you see a map. So this is how this meeting was going on. And domain storytelling here really helped us to identify which meetings to attend and interpret what was going on in that meeting. So then came a very creative process where we started with paper-based mockups, because we said, hey, obviously there's a big problem in handling these big lists and also the map. So somehow we have to bring together this time aspect and the geographical aspect. And we started to bounce around ideas and had some conversations with our domain experts, like maybe a digital version of that meeting could look like that. So everyone has a tablet or computer, and you see where you are in your list and have a common view on the same thing. And the next step was to actually design a process around that vision. So on the left, you see the old one, the original process. On the right, you see a sketch or an idea how it would look like. And here you see that actually the format of the software changed. It's now a touch table. And that gave us the chance to come up with a viable process. Okay, if we had the software, how would you work with it? How would a meeting like that work? And basically then all the arrows here later became user stories or requirements for the table. And again, we got feedback from that and refined the process. And then finally said, okay, can you build a prototype? And we did. And this is the prototype. And this whole process took us 4 months from the first meeting to a workable prototype with real map data and real project data. So it's not just a click dummy, it's actual working software, just with a very small functionality, but enough to put it on this device, on this touch table, have people placed around it, and try to have such a meeting. And it worked, so it became a real project, and now it's actually a product running in several cities. And it all started with a couple of domain stories. So you see that was a process where we used it to analyze the situation, come up with new, better software supported business processes, get feedback on them. And also it served as an anchor point for this whole UI and UX design. The second example is much less shiny or flashy because it's about an insurance. It's about a company pension scheme. So you have your personal pension either from the government, from the state, or maybe you have a individual personal pension that pay yourself. But some companies also offer company pensions where part of your salary goes into that fund. And then when you retire, you get basically your piggy bank full of money sponsored by your employer. So this is a company that provides such services to other companies. And their problem was and still is, they have this big standard software that they customized a lot to make this work, because it was actually built for a different kind of insurance. So they kind of customized it very heavily. Actually, some million lines of code were customized in the system. And now they've arrived at a point where they said, okay, this cannot go on forever. We need to find some slices that we can take out, carve out of this standard application and develop it as new software, as individual software as opposed to the off-the-shelf software. So the task here was find those slices, find slices where you can really say, okay, this part of functionality that's in DDD terms a bounded context. So we were looking for bounded contexts, or actually for subdomains that then become bounded contexts. And interestingly, we used a mix of domain storytelling and event storming here. And I know the graphics are not very good. That's on purpose, actually, even though it's an anonymous picture, but still, well, it doesn't really matter what's in there. You see there's a lot of things going on the left picture with an insurance, pension insurance in a company, and some money and documents are changing hands. And the left picture shows how we did it originally in the workshop. And then we started to have discussions like which of these activities do belong together, which are very closely related, which are not so closely related. And that's when we started to rearrange the layout a little bit so that the things that have to do with each other are closely related. And that's when we switched to the right graphic here. And then we started to draw boxes around the parts that belong together. And those are actually our candidates for bounded context. So we have something like registration or benefits payment or framework contracting. So those became the candidates for the bounded contexts. But there were some parts of this domain where domain storytelling didn't seem right as a methodology, especially the parts that evolved around the life cycle of insurance contract. And for that, we chose event storming, analog and also digital later on. And basically, we did the same thing here. So in the end, we had two inputs for our context diagram, which is the bottom one. So some things we identified in the domain stories, some things we identified in the event storming, some things we had in both, actually. That's a good sign because then it's a better heuristic. And then we extracted it and tried to build our context map from that. So that's another use case for domain storytelling. So analyze our domain, trying to find subdomains, bounded context, slice it up. And the third and final example is from a colleague of mine at an airport. They did several projects there. The one that I'm talking about is improving the way that passengers get from the gate to the runway where the planes are. In many airports, there are these, how are they called? These bridges, they're called bridges, yeah, where you walk into the plane. But in this particular case, they actually have a lot of buses that drive people to the planes, and it's quite a cumbersome process, actually. So that's a part of the as-is process, driving passengers from gate to the runway. And actually what they did is they did an as-is analysis. Where are the big pain points? And they identified 3 parts in this process. And especially the large red circle below involving the bus driver. It's all German, sorry. Involving the bus driver. That was problematic because it involved a lot of manual work, still writing things on paper and handing in paper reports that later get digitalized and very error prone and slow. And so they started a project and said, okay, let's make a project and digitalize this part of the process. So again, they used domain storytelling to come up with a better IT supported process with an app for the bus drivers. So the whole disposition process can be scheduled much better. This is again something that they did together with the domain experts, so the software developers and domain experts together. And for every step in this process, let me go back, that involves the bus app that you see in the middle here, for every step, they started to draw mock-ups, again, paper-based, to visualize the information that would be needed to carry out that step or the result of that step. So they kind of transformed the domain story into kind of a user journey with the help of the mockups. And that together enabled them to fill their backlog for the project to get it approved later on. So they had still very coarse-grained, but very well validated user stories. This is just a glimpse at the backlog, not the whole, of course. So they had an idea, like what's the context, what's the process looking like, which steps need to be supported. And also they had the mockups, so they had an idea what to build. And that gave them the possibility to fill the backlog, to prioritize it, and also to estimate the priority and also the effort it would take to build it. And that's how they used it for planning the new process and also the project. Okay, I've been talking for quite a long time now, but still there's more, of course, to it. I'm not able to tell you everything I could tell you about domain storytelling, but Henning, my colleague that you saw on one of the slides, and I have been writing a book about it. So far we've been writing it on LeanPub. I'm not sure if you know LeanPub, but it gives you the possibility to write something, publish it, and then add to the book and publish a new version. So it's really a iterative and incremental platform. Right now, the book is like 80% done. And if you download it from LeanPub, you will get notified every time we publish a new version. And I guess this is the best time now to actually give you a voucher, because as far as I know, LeanPub works in Iran, but to use LeanPub, you need to pay for the book with a PayPal account, and that doesn't really work in Iran, right? So we said, okay, we will just give you the book for free. So I will post a voucher code into the chat in a minute or two, and you can use that code to just download a copy and yeah, read it and give us feedback on it. It would be really cool. As I said, it's still in progress, and actually the next version, I guess, will be published by the end of this month. Finally, we are going to publish the chapter Working with Requirements, my favorite chapter. So yeah, go ahead and enjoy. And then this is the final slide, just a collection of links. I will publish this slide deck on SpeakerDeck, and I guess the meetup organizers can maybe post a link to it later in the meetup page that you use, and then you can access the slides. And there's basically everything you need to know. And yeah, I guess that's it from me. And now I'm really curious for your questions. I see there's a lot of things going on in the chat. So maybe I'll post the link in the chat. Can you maybe take over and have a look at the chat and the questions and moderate that?
Yeah, there was only one question. It was about the tool that you used, but you already answered this question. Personally, I had two questions for you. The first one was, when do you tell yourself that, yeah, now it's the time to use domain storytelling? When do you start it, and when do you repeat it?
Yeah. So I'm posting the link to the LeanPub book right now. And now I'm able to talk again because I'm really bad at doing two things at once. So of course, it depends a little on the situation that you're in. I can answer by giving another example. So we did a project a while ago where our customer gave us a requirements specification document. 400 pages full of requirements. Not very agile, but they were a government institution, so they had to do it that way. It was mandatory. And they had a lot of use cases they wanted us to build, but very little on the processes. So we said, okay, we know like this whole bag of use cases, but how are they all interconnected? How do they play together? So that's when we as developers said, okay, please, let's spend 2 or 3 hours and tell us your most important business processes. And then we understood, okay, these are the problems. And that's why this feature is so important for them, because they have really a bad situation right now. And that helped us to understand everything and put everything in context. And this understanding lasted for, let's say, 2 or 3 months. And we said, okay, in the meantime, we started to build software. And then we said, okay, now we really would like to understand how you envision your future work process, so the to-be process. So again, we had a workshop. And they said, okay, we want to use this new software like this and that, and then this is going to happen, that's going to happen. And again, that helped us until we reached a point where they said, okay, so we want to ship the first part of the software into production, because the whole backlog was, or the specification was actually prioritized in 2 deployments. So the first deployment and then the second deployment. And we said, well, we have a strange feeling something is not working out here. So maybe let's look again at more detail at what the software can actually do now. And then we discovered that there was actually a slip up in the priorities, because some features that they needed in the first delivery were planned for the second. And with domain storytelling, we could show them, hey, there's a hole in there in the process. You know, you're reaching a dead end, and the feature that kind of goes to the next step, well, you planned that for the next 3 months to come. So they rearranged the priorities, and in the end, it worked out. So that's a typical example where we used it over and over again. So not just in the beginning of a project to get familiar with a domain, but also repeatedly whenever we had a problem with the processes, either with they currently are or like they should be. So that's a typical example of that, yeah. And now I've already seen another question, and maybe that kind of ties in together with your question, like when to use it.
The second one is about event storming.
Yeah, exactly. When do you use event storming? So in the beginning, as said, this whole collaborative modeling, well, it's like a toolbox, and we have several tools in it. So there's domain storytelling, event storming, user story mapping, can even count example mapping and a couple of other tools in this toolbox. And it's always good to have more than just one tool, because you know the saying, if everything, if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. But what if you actually don't have a nail, you have a screw or maybe something you need to glue together? Well, you would better be off with a different tool. So often with the situation where you could actually use both. And if you're familiar with event storming and are happy with it and the results are great, okay, then there's probably no reason to switch. But then again, there are situations, I gave one example where we use both in the same project. That happens quite frequently now. And then it's interesting to know which tool to pick when. So for example, whenever I want to really understand collaboration, how people work together, how people and systems work together, how they exchange information, that's much better in my experience to capture with domain storytelling, because you see the actors and how they interact with each other. In event storming, you have a timeline. And that means that you see what is happening, but you know the stick is for the actors. If you even use them, they are much smaller, and you have the same actor, the travel agent here and there and there and there, and there's travel agent customer, and okay, so they're exchanging information, but it's still based or arranged all on a timeline. So sometimes when we run into that during event storming, we say, hey, this segment here, this is highly cooperative. Let's look at this part of the event stream and let's try another perspective and model it again, maybe in more detail with domain storytelling. And then the perspective changes away from time towards cooperation. So that gives you another perspective as well. We also had combinations where we did it the other way around, where we started with a big picture domain storytelling. And then when it was a bit more technical and more towards implementing a domain model, people said, well, can we do this with event storming now and do like this design level, implementation level event storming? And that also works. So it's always good to have an option. And my first criteria for picking domain storytelling is always, is it a very cooperative process? Yes, then it looks like domain storytelling is probably the best choice. And actually now with a couple of clients that I have that we've used both methods, usually they themselves say, hey, can we do an event storming on this, or can we do a domain storytelling on that? Because they understand pretty quickly which method is best for which situation.
Thank you.
Did that answer the question?
We hope so. Sebastian can solve the question. There is a second question from Ibrahim. He asked if domain storytelling is more classified in knowledge crunching methods or more in design approach.
Yeah. So I guess it's both. So it's definitely a knowledge crunching method. I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with the term, but it appears in DDD several times. So really transfer domain knowledge from the domain experts into everyone involved in the software development project. So in the developers, in the UX designers, in the testers' heads and the business analysts' heads. So yes, that of course, because it really gets this conversation going. You really have in-depth conversations about stuff. I frequently see this kind of moments of revelation between the domain experts themselves, where people from different departments come together in the same room and say, finally, I understand why we are doing this, because they usually have just, they just know their little part of the whole process. And once you get them together and say, okay, your department, their department, you're exchanging all these documents all the time, what purpose does it have? Then they begin to understand. So knowledge crunching, definitely. When you say design approach, design in the sense of process design. That's actually another reason for me that in some cases I prefer domain storytelling to event storming. Every time when it's not about analyzing a situation, but when it's about designing a business process together with domain experts, I usually tend towards domain storytelling because it has worked better for me than the process design level of event storming. That's maybe then a second step, but I like it better to work out the scenario and the story with domain storytelling, because I have the feeling that people, especially domain experts, are more on board. And once you figure that out, you can take that and go a level deeper with event storming. So in that sense, it's a design approach. Yes, it's not a design approach when you think about design as UX design. There's a connection there. I showed one in the examples where you can say, okay, this is the story that we want to build, and now we will make mock-ups for the several steps. But it's not a real, like, it's not an approach that says you have to include mock-ups or something. It's just a possibility to connect different things. So for example, what we did is we had domain story that gave us the context, and we said, okay, these 3 steps here, we need to implement them. Let's have a design studio, if you know that technique, and then this domain story and the steps there, they are the input for the design studio, and then the whole team designs mockups for the interaction of these steps in question.
Thank you. Okay, what personally I found powerful in domain storytelling is that it's easier to understand, as we can also replay things, and it's much more faster than even storming. That was my first view of the teams. So I have another question. So do you invite the same people in a domain storytelling session that you invite in an event storming, or it's different people?
Yeah, no, it's actually the same people you would invite to a big picture event storming. So that's the same target group, yes. And yeah, it can be different. Well, if you use event storming on this implementation level, where you really design your aggregates and everything, then you usually just deal with developers or the development team, and not so much anymore with the domain experts. So then it's a different group. But if you compare domain storytelling and event storming on the big picture level, and maybe even on the process design level, then it's the same group of people, yeah.
So we have another question from Sebastian. He asked, does it happen that a domain storytelling reveals problems in business process? How do you manage this situation?
Yeah, it happens. There's a funny story. It happened a long time ago, so I can tell it. I'm not going to name names, but it was the best one. It didn't happen to me, but to my colleague and my boss. But the story is so good, I wish I'd been there. So the story goes as follows. Again, it's in the logistics domain, and we are talking about a logistics warehouse, a big yard with lots of containers and boxes where stuff gets shipped. And out there on the yard, there are guys that the guys that work there, they look like that because they all need to do heavy lifting, and it must be quite funny to have people like that in a domain storytelling workshop, because it's usually not the kind of people that are used to office work. But so that's funny that it worked even with them, though they are used to physical work and not to office work. And that was pretty much the first time they were together with the people from the I think in English it's also called disposition department. So that department that knows, okay, this train is coming at that time and this truck is coming at that time. Oh no, that container that is ready to pick up, but the truck is still in a traffic jam and we need to delay it. So they manage everything like that. And what they did is they sent the disposition guys, they sent faxes. So back then there was still paper and faxes to a fax machine inside a little office. It was in a container. It was actually their breakfast room for the guys who did the heavy lifting. And in the corner of this breakfast room was a little fax machine. And then the fax arrived and said, this truck from the logistics company so-and-so will be 3 hours late, and you need to delay the picking up of that container and so on. So that's how they got the updates. So but my colleagues and they were in the same room and talking about this process, trying to improve it. And when it came to faxes, the guys who did the heavy lifting, they said, those piles of paper, we always throw them away. You do what? So that was apparently quite a difficult situation, because emotions kind of came into play. So it turned out that none of the hard work of the disposition guys, where they put all the information like which train is coming early, which truck is coming late, where they put all that into faxes and put it into the fax machine and send it there. It was all for nothing. Why was it all for nothing? Because they didn't realize that the guys who were supposed to read their faxes, they're actually out there in the rain or the steamingly hot sun all day doing the hard work, and they only have a break like every 3 hours, and then they come into this little office, and what they do then is they drink their coffee, they eat their sandwiches, and they don't want to be bothered by notifications that that are 3 hours old, because when it says, well, the truck will be 2 hours late, well, it already arrived by the time I read the fax, right? So they said, okay, it's not worth going through a pile of outdated information. They just threw in the trash as it was and dealt with it on their own way. So that's a typical case of what happens when people who just make assumptions, who are not really talking directly together, when they actually are in the same room talking together. And that was probably the best example, or the most vivid example. And then a skill comes into play that is probably not natural to software developers, and those are moderation skills. Because you really have to try and take out the emotion of everything. So I've had workshops where people were actually shouting at each other. It was about a report, and one person said, "Oh, why are you making such a big deal of this? It's just a stupid report." My report is not stupid. Okay, and then it's tough for a software developer who kind of grew into this role to actually moderate the situation. But the best tip that I have is try to get people back to the story, and that's where really the story format helps, because it's tangible, it's vivid. And when you say, okay, we only have 1 hour left, we need to finish the story, don't leave here with a cliffhanger, then people try to calm down and yeah, to try to finish the goal together. So the story is something that they usually can agree on. So there are some books on moderation techniques that I found helpful. So that would be a recommendation. Yes, my advice would be back to the story. That's always very helpful. And sometimes it's helpful if two people just cannot agree on how a process works. You say, okay, so there's Mr. Miller and Ms. Smith, and one says it's this way, the other one says, no, it's that way. So which one tells the truth, right? So what we do then is we make the stories even more concrete. So we don't say this is the travel agency. So we say this is not the travel agent, this is Mr. Miller, the travel agent. And then Mr. Miller tests the process from his side. And then we have Ms. Smith, and she tests the process from her side, and we draw a separate picture for that. And usually what happens when we put these pictures next to each other is they are not so much different. Maybe they're different in a few little details, but usually this whole argument like, no, you're doing it all wrong, it boils down to just a few differences, and that's something, again, you can work with. So that's another trick that I sometimes use. But I have to say, I'm lucky. Most of the time it works rather well. Yeah, but it can happen, yeah.
Thank you.
It was a long answer to a short question. I'm sorry.
Very well. Personally, I have a last question, which is more general than domain storytelling. How do you avoid business experts to go a lot in details? You know, when you let business experts, people talk, they talk, and you can't stop them. Yeah. How do you manage this situation?
Well, it's always good to beforehand agree on the purpose of the session. For the demo, actually, we didn't do that because it's just a demo. But usually in a real world situation, you have certain questions that you want answers to. So you know, are we doing this so we learn about the domain because we've never worked in this domain before? Are we doing this to analyze where our current IT solutions or software solutions are not good enough? Are we trying to design a new process around this new off-the-shelf software? What is the goal? So we first talk about that, and then as a moderator I know, okay, which scope. So I talked about scope, like what level of detail and so on, and once that is settled, I know which level of detail to aim for, and then I try to keep it a consistent level of detail. So for example, let's again take the process we modeled together. If for some reason Mariam would have told me about, well, and then about the payment process, I have to put in the card, the credit card into the terminal, and then the PIN, and then maybe the PIN is wrong, and so on and so on and so on. I would say, okay, this is far too detailed, much more detailed than the rest of the story. Let's try to keep it on the same level of detail. So that's one trick to do that. Another trick is, of course, again, to say, okay, let's go back to the story, because usually you have a limited amount of time, right? Everyone is busy these days, so you can't afford to just extend a 2-hour meeting into a 4-hour meeting or a 6-hour meeting. It doesn't work that way. So what I try to do then is, if I know time is an issue here, I say, we have one common goal for this workshop. We have 2 hours time, and this process that we want to look at, I want to look at it from beginning to end. And if that means we have to leave out some detail, I would rather have a more coarse-grained process, but at least I know how it begins all the way to how it ends, as opposed to we start the story and then in the middle it stops because we're out of time. So that's the time boxing trick that I use. And if time permits, you can always go lower or on a lower level. But if you're seeing that time becomes an issue, I would rather say, okay, let's stay on a coarse-grained level. And the last trick is often people do that because they seldom have the chance to be heard. So finally, someone is listening to them. Finally, they can tell either how busy they are, maybe how great they are, or what problems they have. And that can lead people to actually sharing more information that is necessary and kind of losing sight of the goal. So again, I try to value that. So I say, okay, I'll make a quick note of that and we will have a look at it later. And now please, let's go back to the story. So you see, it's always the same couple of tricks that I use. So I try not to shut people up and say, that's enough and let's just ignore that. I try to write it down. And then I say, but before we deal with that information that you just gave me, let's finish the story. And then in the end, the last 10 minutes, we will revisit it. And if we then decide that we need to have a look at it, we'll schedule another meeting rather than getting distracted by that information.
Thanks a lot, Stefan. Apparently, we don't have any more questions. So I hope that our participants learned something, that they enjoyed it. Personally, I really loved your demo. I will try to use it in a real world project to see what happens. I would like to thank you again, Stefan, giving your time to us. I would like to thank Mariam, Masoud, and Ibrahim that helped us to organize this event. And perfect. Have a good night. And bon appétit. If you didn't
enjoy your weekend, everyone.
Yeah, enjoy your weekend. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. It was a pleasure talking to you. All the best to you. Khoda Hafiz.
You too. Khodafez. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, and thanks again, Sapar. It was an honor to be with you all, and goodbye.
Thank you, Mariam. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.